Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 119 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is the podcast where I discuss current events related to foreign policy and international news and then give some analysis on those events. The podcast can be found at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, at the libertarianinstitute.org on the homepage, or at the Libertarian Union Facebook page. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I think I have a pretty good show planned for you today. If you could all take the time to go to one of those three places and then share the show or subscribe to or, rate and review the show on iTunes, I really appreciate it. The show's doing well. I'm excited that, after 118 episodes, I'm still doing the show and everything, but, it's with everybody's support. So by sharing this show and taking the time to recommend it to friends, family, whoever, it's going to help. So if we do that, I'll keep talking about the news. The first thing I want to discuss is a RT interview I saw with Dan McAdams. Dan McAdams was on the show to discuss a State Department program where the U.S. is going to spend $750,000 on Hungarian media. Dan McAdams is somebody who I believe spent some time in Europe and maybe in Hungary itself, and so is quite knowledgeable on the country and understands the actual politics and local politics of the country. Dan McAdams, who I believe runs the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, talked about how the United States is looking to insert that money into media organizations in the more rural areas of Hungary, and these areas of Hungary are typically supportive of the Hungarian president. The Hungarian president is one of, I would say, the limited number of foreign leaders who seems to have at least a positive view of Trump and openly admits, and they have kind of an open, positive relationship. Dan McAdams makes the point that $750,000 at the State Department is really a drop in the bucket. However, if you look at what that money could do in Hungary, it could certainly at least influence some of the media and cause some media markets to look to pick up some extra money from the U.S. government and run more stories favorable to the general U.S. positions in Hungary, which is, I'm sure, to undermine anyone who may want to have a favorable relationship with Russia. The U.S. is actually, taking a somewhat strategic approach, according to McAdams, and not really looking to influence the general elections of Hungary, but look to influence the local elections of Hungary. And by doing this, be able to, start to move the needle in their direction. So this is an awfully sneaky program. It may be that somebody in the deep state is looking to undermine Donald Trump by, carrying this out behind his back. But it is an example when everybody, talks about, Russia influencing or hacking the U.S. election. Here's an example of the U.S. doing the same thing right now. And so if that is such a terrible offense, maybe we should look into stop doing it overseas. I read a good article, I believe by Adam Johnson, who is a writer at FAIR, which is a organization that looks to expose dishonesty in media. So Johnson's article is on this organization, a U.S. think tank, Center for Strategic International Studies. And it's one of these think tanks like, New American Century or, whichever ones Bill Kristol works at it. And they put out all these, different battle plans or suggestions. But one they've really been pushing lately is the placement of THAAD missiles in South Korea. And of course, I've already talked about that there are some of these there already, but Donald Trump announced maybe there will be some more put there in the coming years while he was in South Korea. So certainly the, whoever mates and sells the THAAD missile systems is really benefiting from this group constantly pushing them, and that happens to be Lockheed Martin. The think tank, CSIS is the acronym for short, has Lockheed Martin as a top donor, and then they constantly tell the American people that we need to sell more Lockheed products, or just give Lockheed products away to the South Koreans. And so that seems, pretty suspicious and fishy to me. That just so happens that the people you're taking a lot of money from are the same people who you're helping make a lot of money. It's certainly a problem, especially since a lot of these guys end up working for the government and bouncing around. Johnson points out this in his article as well, how there's several either members of the weapons companies or members of these think tanks that interchange between the think tanks, weapons companies, and government. And what this amounts to is an absolute scam and racket against the American people. This is a group of a few elite people, some that work at the think tank, some that work in the government, and some that work at these weapons companies. And they're taking advantage. So they're, people are paying their taxes and they're taking a portion of that tax money in order to enrich themselves. And then they're paying some people to tell the American people how much their products are needed, but rather than doing that, by running ads or in any kind of honest way, they're doing it by funding these think tanks, which are portrayed as the people who know all, when in reality, they're just the people who are, the ad companies essentially for the military industrial complex. So in a couple good news stories about North Korea, South Korea, we have the South Koreans, not at a super high level, but a higher ranking government official saying that the United States needs South Korean consent before attacking North Korea. Now, I don't know how true this is. I think if Donald Trump ordered the B-52s to go nuke North Korea, then the South Koreans just don't have a whole lot of say in that because it's going to happen. I will say that I think it's unlikely that the United States could attack North Korea without South Korea at least knowing. And then they could put up whatever kind of protest they want. I guess ultimately they could maybe attempt to expose the attack before it happens in order to have, kind of force the Americans' hand in backing off. However, it just seems to me that the United States would kind of have to have consent of South Korea and likely Japan just because of how many U.S. military assets would need to be ready and moving around. I think if, you're going to go ahead and carry out a preemptive strike against North Korea, you have to be immediately ready to, go in and start, trying to pick up all the nuclear bomb pieces that, that North Korea has around the country before they spill out. And, you risk having nuclear bombs on the loose in the world. So I don't know if the United States needs South Korea's consent, but depending on how far South Korea is willing to take it, maybe they do have quite a bit of power here and maybe even have the trump card over the United States in that they could pull the rug out from under a U.S. invasion or a preemptive attack against North Korea. The other good news is that we have China saying that they are going to send a high-level envoy to North Korea for talks. This at least suggests that Trump, and I'm sure the Chinese president discussed this while Trump was in China. Who knows if Trump signed on or maybe even encouraged the Chinese to take these steps, but it did happen. That's good news, and hopefully, we can move on and have some more success diplomatically with North Korea moving forward. One of the more interesting stories going on right now, and of course there are always, I think, a ton of them in foreign policy, but I think some of the more captivating ones are what's going on in Saudi Arabia, especially with the arrest of the, Saudi princes, Bandar, the 6th richest man in the world, Prince Al-Weeb, I believe is how it's pronounced. I might have been pronouncing it wrong. W-A-L-E-E-D is how you spell that. And then as well, the imprisonment of Lebanon's Prime Minister Hariri and the forcing of his resignation. So right now you have the situation where Lebanon's Prime Minister is still being held in Saudi Arabia. The EU and some more international groups have started to say, hey, Saudi Arabia, this isn't right. So it looks like that the Lebanese Prime Minister will be traveling to France on Saturday and meeting with Macron, and I don't know what happens from there. I guess we see what happens. I'm not sure that this meeting even takes place. If it gets canceled for some reason, it seems like Saudi Arabia is losing a lot of control over the situation in Lebanon if the Prime Minister leaves the country. So I have some real questions as to if they will actually do it. Maybe they don't have a choice. Maybe the international community is telling them that, hey, you gotta let this guy go. The other issues, of course, are one, when will Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince who really set up this whole big purge play, end up taking the crown? We had some reports today that will be occurring very soon. I'm not sure if there's going to be any actual differences in what happens once he takes the crown and once he doesn't. It seems like he's pretty much in control of what happens in Saudi Arabia right now. Not only because he's the crown prince, but because he's the defense minister and holds several other important titles. So basically he has say over everything. And his father is a rather decrepit man at this point and is likely has dementia and is kind of... If any of you are interested in taking a really deep dive into this, I recommend checking out the podcast Around the Empire on their most recent show. Dan Wright and Joanne Leone, who hosts the show, spend, like I said, quite a long time, but it's definitely worth it because they did a lot of background research. They have a lot of good clips of kind of some of these Saudi princes talking in the run-up to the what they're calling the purge of the Saudi princes and the consolidation of power by Mohammed bin Salman. So if you're interested, like I said, in a deep dive, check out that show. I'm sure I will have more to say on this next week as we see what happens with Lebanon's prime minister. Right now we have the brother of Lebanon's prime minister, who I think due to maybe family politics is the least favored son of the father, who I believe was Lebanon's prime minister and assassinated, and also isn't the favorite child of the mother, who has kind of come out and said that she wouldn't support his candidacy for Lebanese prime minister without the endorsement of his younger brother Harari, who's the current prime minister. But we have the older brother making statements kind of positive towards the Saudi line on things, saying it's all Iran and Hezbollah's fault. And so that may suggest that Saudi Arabia is looking to do a deal where they get the other brother in power and take the younger Harari out of play. The other thing going on, and one of the reasons why may have had the imprisonment and Saudi Arabia attempting to remove Harari from power, was because he was a very good friend of one of the sons of King Abdullah that was killed when they were attempting to arrest him. And so them two being, I guess kind of best friends and growing up together may have created some problems for Mohammed bin Salman if the prime minister of Lebanon is able to raise concerns over his purge. Also, I guess this suggests that he was probably more loyal to the other factions of the al-Saud family and not the bin Salman portion. Other big news in Zimbabwe, we have President Robert Mugabe, I guess, just being removed from power at this point. It seems like what's been going on in Zimbabwe over the past few years, but accelerated recently, was that as the former president of the country, Robert Mugabe, got into his 90s and became more and more of a decrepit war criminal, he the people around him, his wife, his son, and his vice president and military commander all started vying for, I guess, his position. There seems to be an awful lot of concern and a little bit of a mainstream media consensus that the wife of the president, who is this Grace or Gucci Mugabe, was looking to really seize the power, but she wasn't, was an exceptionally corrupt person, even by Zimbabwe standards, was a very, terribly corrupt person. I believe she was formally sanctioned by the EU because she was going on these luxurious shopping trips in the EU, while people in Zimbabwe were starving to death very rapidly. I believe under the presidentship of Robert Mugabe, 75% of the people, or 25% of the people of Zimbabwe have left the country. So the vice president, I think, was ousted last week by Robert Mugabe, but I guess a lot of people have seen this as a move by the first lady there, Grace, and the commander of the military decided to side with the vice president. So he just rolled the tanks into the capital and put it on lockdown. I'm not sure if either this was a miscalculation. I mean, everybody thinks these world leaders are geniuses, but maybe this, Grace Mugabe just wasn't all that smart and, miscalculated. And she thought that, everybody would listen to the president, but, the military commander realized that at this stage in his life, he wasn't calling the shots anymore, so he was going to take the side of the former vice president. And it seems that the other kind of international pressures are all on Mugabe to kind of take a resignation. I think they're looking to do this in a way where he's able to stave off some of his dignity and just kind of ride off into the sunset. I guess this is the way you gotta do it. As much as this guy is obviously a war criminal and responsible for killing tons and tons of people, I believe there were massacres in his revolution that killed 20,000 people at a time. If the way that Zimbabwe transitions away from his presidency and on to the next one is for him to, kind of have a luxurious send-off, so be it. I'm sure things will continue to develop over the weekend as the other southern African countries and the African Union and the UN all weigh in on and try to influence this into happening, and we'll see how things go. I saw an interesting article. ISIS has released a video of their snipers using a lot of U.S. weapons and equipment. I guess they're using these thermal scopes and then U.S. sniper rifles on their sniping teams. This is just another example of the United States foreign policy in the Middle East backfiring so badly that the jihadists are now using American weapons against us. In Afghanistan, we have a record opium crop in 2017. I'm going to give you another podcast to listen to. Take the weekend and do it. This is Scott Horton and Alfred McCoy. You find that podcast at libertarianinstitute.org. Of course, right next to mine on the right-hand side of the screen. So Scott and this guy really go through and detail kind of what's going on in the Afghanistan opium trade and how that's impacting the overall Afghanistan war. The few things that I think are really important, and I should say from the interview on this show, is that McCoy really believes that that the Taliban are funding their war effort through the opium trade, and that the United States presence in Afghanistan is creating more and more opium farms and markets in Afghanistan, so leading to more heroin production. And I think at this point, Afghanistan is the largest producer of illicit heroin in the world. It looks like if the United States continues to intervene in Afghanistan, we're only going to create more and more, heroin trade, and this is only going to empower the Taliban and, other people who are willing to, engage in the illicit heroin trade. I don't know if it was coincidentally or not, but then the United States annual report on the Afghanistan opium trade came out. Record crops in 2017, both in amount produced and land usage. The U.S. also set a record, and it destroyed the most acres of poppy crops since the invasion started in 2001. And so if you look at how things are going now, it certainly looks like we're just ending up with more heroin and more money for the Taliban. McCoy specifically mentions that the Taliban need about $90 million in order to fund a 25,000 man army every year, and that the opium trade, I believe in Afghanistan last year, produced like $1.3 billion or some estimate like that. It's probably Afghanistan's largest export and the biggest contributor to their GDP. So, this is very important to the Afghan people at this point. Of course, a lot of this territory before was all fruit fields, and so rather than having something that, probably healthy that really helps the local population, you end up with the people producing the crop that, could, produce the most, but also if it gets destroyed, you pick up and go somewhere else. If your fruit trees are destroyed, that's an awful big problem, and it's really hard to produce, those, again, because it takes years and years for them to come in. Other news out of Afghanistan, we have the Inspector General report saying that the United States military didn't have an explicit policy on how to deal with child molesters in Afghanistan and in that war, and that some troops felt like there was an untold policy that you kind of just ignore that thing. Of course, the U.S. came out and protested this, but this is just an example. Look, everybody's all up in arms about all the sexual harassment stuff going on, and I'm not trying to downplay it or say it's not a big deal. But right now in Afghanistan, you have the United States supporting warlords who are notorious child molesters. I believe there's a pretty old practice in Afghanistan where some of these warlords would just kind of roll through and be able to pick out boys from the local villages, and the family just had to let the warlord, prey on the boy. This is one of the things that was discussed when, the United States was going in, is that, well, we're going to put all these people back in power that are child molesters, and as bad as the Taliban were, at least they weren't child molesters. However, this is kind of the situation that the United States finds itself in when we're trying to maintain a world empire, that, you end up on the side of people who rape boys. We also have 14 people killed in a terror attack in Kabul. ISIS is claiming responsibility for this one. That's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with 3 new episodes. I'm going to try to have Will Porter on next week to discuss the fall of ISIS, which is part 2 in our 2-part series on the rise and fall of ISIS. The first show was great. Everybody should check that out if you haven't gotten the chance. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, on Facebook, The Libertarian Union. It's a group of libertarian podcasts, featuring mine and several others. Great content there. Everybody should go check it out. I was just on Patrick's show, Liberty Weekly, and we discussed foreign policy stuff. So if you're, liking this show and want to see what it's like when somebody interviews me, go check that out. Twitter at KYAAALE. I do a daily news roundup that's also featured at thelibertarianinstitute.org and on my website, kylesfilesblog.com. That's all I have. Have a good weekend.